Imagine it's just after 1:30 in the morning. Pitch black over the Pacific Ocean. A Boeing 737 cargo plane, Transair Flight 810, takes off from Honolulu for what should be a completely routine trip. But in just a matter of minutes, this flight will turn into a desperate battle for survival. And it'll kick off an investigation that reveals a mystery not about failing machines, but about the human mind itself when it's pushed to the absolute limit. That right there, that's the chilling final call from inside the cockpit of Flight 810. It is the sound of a modern jetliner hitting the ocean. So how on earth does a plane that just took off end up in the water?
The timeline here is just terrifyingly short. Think about it. 1 minute after takeoff, the first sign of trouble. Just 8 minutes after that, they're talking about a second engine failing. And by 1:45 a.m., only 12 minutes after leaving the ground, the plane is down. This wasn't some long, drawn-out emergency. This was an incredibly fast spiral into disaster. Now, as the two pilots are miraculously being rescued from the dark ocean, the National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, is already getting to work. And the central question they're facing is, well, it's a big one. So, the pilots are crystal clear. They say both of their engines failed. For investigators, this is a massive red flag. See, modern jet engines are unbelievably reliable. For just one to fail is rare, but for two to fail independently on the same flight, that's almost statistically impossible. So right away, the investigators were, let's say, skeptical. Okay, so what's the first thing you check? What could possibly take out two engines at the same time? Well, the most logical culprit is the one thing they both share, the fuel. But that lead went cold, and it went cold fast. The NTSB grabbed samples from the exact truck that fueled Flight 810, and the results came back conclusive. The fuel was perfectly fine. It met every single standard. So the mystery just got a little deeper. All right, so if it's not the fuel, what else is out there that could choke out two jet engines, especially in a place like Hawaii, which is a volcanic hotspot? Volcanic ash is basically like throwing fine-grained sand and glass into an engine. It can cause them to flame out. And another dead end. The weather reports for that night were totally clear. No volcanic plumes, no ash warnings, nothing. So with all the most obvious theories for a double engine failure completely debunked, the investigators realized something. The answers weren't going to be found on land.
The only way to know for sure what happened to those engines was to actually look at them. And that meant launching a huge, incredibly complex, deep water recovery operation to pull the wreckage of Flight 810 up from the bottom of the ocean. The plane was sitting 350 feet down. Getting it back up required remotely operated vehicles, specialized salvage ships. It was one of the biggest recovery efforts the NTSB had undertaken in years. But after weeks of hard work, they did it. They raised the engines. And what they found? Well, it changed absolutely everything.
Okay, this is where the story takes a huge turn. The disconnect here is just massive. The pilots reported that their left engine had totally failed and the right one was overheating. But the physical evidence? It told a completely different story. The left engine was basically fine, no internal damage at all. The right engine, number 2, was damaged. A couple of turbine blades had fractured, but here's the kicker. It was still producing power. The pilots had a perfectly good engine.
And just like that, the entire investigation pivots. The mystery was no longer what happened to the engines. The real question, the one at the heart of this whole case, became why. Why did this experienced flight crew shut down their one good engine and try to fly on the damaged one? The only place to find those answers was inside the cockpit, in those final, frantic minutes. So investigators turned to the plane's so-called black boxes, the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder. And this is the shocking twist. When investigators listened to that voice recorder, they heard that right after the engine trouble started, the pilots made the correct diagnosis. They identified that the number 2 engine, the right engine, was the one with the problem. They knew what was wrong. So what happened? How did they go from right to so wrong? It was a cascade of small, simple errors. After they correctly identified the problem, the first officer, without saying a word, pulled both throttles back to idle. Now, that's a normal step to manage the situation, but because he didn't announce it, the captain didn't know. So when the captain then looks at his gauges, he sees the power on the healthy left engine is now reading a little lower than the damaged right one.
And right then, the first officer suddenly changes his mind and says, "It looks like number one's gone." The captain, trusting his co-pilot and seeing gauges that seem to back that up, accepts this new, totally wrong diagnosis, and they never questioned it again.
You know, there was even a physical clue that they were both missing. When that right engine lost power, the plane would have naturally wanted to yaw to the right. To stop that, the first officer was pushing on the left rudder pedal, and he held it there for 3 solid minutes. In aviation, there's an old saying, dead foot, dead engine. His right foot was the dead foot, a constant physical reminder that the right engine was the problem. But in the stress and confusion of the moment, that crucial piece of feedback was just completely ignored. This is where the investigation moves beyond the what and into the much trickier territory of why. Why did all these procedures and instincts fail so spectacularly? The answer gets to the very core of modern aviation safety, the human factor. At the center of all this is a concept called crew resource management, or CRM. It's basically a whole system of training designed specifically to prevent these kinds of human errors. It's all about clear communication, cross-checking decisions, and working as a team to catch mistakes before they become catastrophic. And on Flight 810, that system it broke down. That cockpit became a perfect storm of psychological pressure. You had the intense stress of an engine failure at night over the ocean, which led to tunnel vision. They got fixated on the wrong idea and just couldn't shake it. The first officer didn't verbalize a key action. The captain, trusting his co-pilot, didn't verify it. Every one of these things was a tear in the safety net that CRM is supposed to provide. The tragic irony here is almost hard to believe. For nearly 10 minutes, they fought like hell to keep a plane in the air using a damaged, overheating engine, all while a perfectly healthy, fully capable engine was just sitting there at idle, ready to fly them safely back to the airport. They had the tool to save themselves, but in the chaos and confusion, they just couldn't see it. The story of Transair 810 isn't really just about one single accident. It forces us to ask a much, much bigger question. In these high-stakes, high-stress situations, mistakes aren't just possible, they're basically inevitable. So the real challenge isn't just to train people better, it's to design better systems, better procedures, and better technology that can act as a final safety net when our own minds fail us. The question is, how do we build a world that's safe not just from failing machines, but from the fallibility of ourselves?